as I just wait for the details to load up. So then, ladies and gentlemen, we can see Mitchell, Joe, and BR4, the top three, starting up on the hard tires. Bambino being the only driver in the top five, as a matter of fact, to run the mediums. Italiano being in P5 running the hards. Ishtar in P6 running the hards. And then we have a collection of medium runners from P7 stemming down all the way to P10. Alu in P11 using the hards. Scalesy looking to use the mediums as well. And the bottom three using hards as well. So the general consensus seems to be, as Miesco spins out there, the general consensus seems to be that the hard tires are definitely the tires to be on at the start of this race, but we'll definitely see that as the race progresses. And we can see a bunch of divisions are going on at the back of the pack. I'm not entirely too sure what's going on over here, as Alu's leading them very, very slowly there. So he's beginning to slowly drop off from the rest of the grid. Luckily for us, it doesn't make too much of a difference, as our attention's still going to be towards the front of the pack. Right, I apologize for that prolonged silence, but ladies and gentlemen, as Mitchell now approaches the start-finish line and then begins to get into his starting grid position, we're all set to get the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix underway. It is the second last race of the season. The championship really could be decided right here, as if Mitchell wins this championship, if Mitchell wins this race, then I'm pretty sure then it's over for BR4. So let's see what BR4 is going to be able to do. Will he be able to save this championship and continue on the dream of maybe preventing Mitchell from three-peating the Tier 1 grid for the third season in the row, as we still wait for the 5 red lights. There we go. So now then, ladies and gentlemen, we're all set to get the second last race of the season underway. It's lights out and away we go. It looks like Mitchell got off to a bit of a squirrely start there. As we can see now, Joe Royal going side by side with Mitchell and manages to make the move heading into turn 1. BR4 sticking right behind his championship leader and maybe getting a possible better run. It looks like by the exit of that corner. So we'll see if he's able to make a move heading into the next corner. He is not. So he's going to have to stick behind him for the current moment. Obviously, no risky moves at the moment. BR4 can absolutely not risk any mistakes to lose out multiple positions here, so he's going to definitely bide his time and see that if he can make a possible overtake, as he goes a bit off track there at the moment, and that opens the door for Bambino as he's looking towards diving down the inside, and yes, he will. The Williams and the Red Bull now going side by side for the final podium position, and then by the looks of it, it looks like Bambino's actually going to be able to make the overtake stick and promotes himself up into P3 as BR4 unfortunately drops down into P4. Meanwhile, at the back of the grid, we can see a bunch of cars bunching up together and a lot of overtaking opportunities presenting themselves here, as we can see Alu Palu and Donnie going nearly bumper to bumper here. Actually, you know, it's oh, never mind. It's Alu being sandwiched between two Alfa Romeos by the looks of it. And it looks like Alu's not going to be waiting for any other moment. It looks like Alu's going to be making the dive on Typos and manages to promote himself up into P8 as we get presented with the predicted pit stop strategies. Looking a bit down the grid, we can see the Haas of Jaguar now coming into a battle with Scalesy. Obviously, not the best camera angles over here. And we have another battle. We have the same battle over here. And now we can see Jaguar going down the inside and managing to make the overtake stick, promoting himself up into P10. But our attention will go right back up to the top. So we can see now BR4 hasn't exactly managed to be dropped off by Bambino at the current moment, and Mitchell unable to pull away along with Joe. So the whole grid after lap 1 still very heavily bunched up together. This is what we were talking about, that it's so important that BR4 races a clean race here and doesn't risk any silly mistakes to not compromise himself. Oh, and once again, BR4... Oh, it's not BR4, never mind. It looked to be Joe, who unfortunately went massively off the track there, maybe picking up a track invalidation, as we can see in the background now. I thought Typos was maybe making a potential overtake. I'm sorry, but the camera angles here at Jeddah are absolutely terrible. It seems like I can't get a good shot of any of the action to see any possible overtakes building up, so I'll just keep my eye on the timing sheets. And what a good idea that was. We can see Typos now getting very close to Rigo. Still unable to make that overtake stick, but Bambino on the other hand now getting extremely close to Mitchell. What an ideal strategy this would be for BR4 if Bambino can get past Mitchell, but by the looks of it, Mitchell's looking to get past Joe. It's a very impressive run from the Williams team at the moment, currently sitting P1 and P3 respectively. Now, who has the better run on each other as we begin lap 3, and DRS will be enabled this lap. So we'll be looking forward to a lot more overtakes through this race now. Mitchell thought about diving down the inside, but thinks better of it. Continues to stay in P2. Meanwhile, we have another overtake building up. Jaguar around the outside, trying to make the move stick on Alu. They're still side by side with each other, and it looks like the Alpine of Scalesy looking to get very involved in this situation as he now looked towards maybe diving on the inside. And unfortunately, Stell's retired. That's going to be the end of Stell's race as he goes into the pits and unfortunately retires from the session and becomes the first retiree. Luckily, he didn't do it on track, so we have no safety cars at the moment. He must have been very heavily involved in some sort of incident, which brought an end to his race, unfortunately. And the gaps don't seem to be building. It seems like Ishtar's managed to drop off from the rest of the pack. He does have Adam right behind him, but unfortunately Ishtar's not going to have DRS to defend the rest of the positions from. And now with DRS wide open, this little train over here is going to prevent these drivers from overtaking each other. But BR4 not letting that stop him as we get a great aerial shot there. I wish there was more of that so we can see more of the action unfolding. Heading down the pit straight once more. It doesn't look like there's going to be any overtakes heading into turn 1 at the moment. There's a bit of battling going on in the background there. It seems to be between Jaguar and Scalesy. So we saw, between Alu and Scalesy. We saw Alu unfortunately got overtaken by Jaguar earlier on in the race. And that little run out of that corner did seem to compromise him, as now Scalesy going side by side with the Alfa Romeo driver. But luckily for Alu, with the inside line, he manages to retain the position and stays in P10. BR4 now massively gaining on Bambino, roughly 2/10 separating him and P3. So the rest of the drivers getting very close together here. Mitchell almost a 10th behind Joe. And we can see P1 down to P4 basically going bumper to bumper here at Saudi Arabia. With some great action in store for us. It looks like we're going to have some great action in store for us throughout this entire race. Now once again through the DRS section. It looks like Bambino's a lot closer on this occasion with DRS wide open. Is he going to be able to catch up to Mitchell? It doesn't seem to be the case. And it looks like BR4 is actually beginning to slowly drop off a little bit there. The gap now roughly 0.4 of a second. And now we can see Bambino looking towards going side by side with Mitchell. And Mitchell now trying to climb the gap with Joe. But Joe manages to cover off the exit very nicely. And now the Williams now both going side by side, heading towards the final corner of the track. Mitchell now with the inside line manages to keep the position and stay. Never mind, is now going side by side with the Bambino and drops down into P3. And this opens the window perfectly for BR4 as he now looks to capitalize on the compromised Mitchell, as there's almost 3 wide heading into the corner. And now there's Bambino and Joe, both the Williams drivers going side by side with each other. And unfortunately, Joe gets spun around, and Mitchell gets spun around. Mitchell, your championship leader. This is exactly what we were talking about earlier on in this race, that a big mistake would heavily cost him. And that collision with Joe has unfortunately dropped him down into P12. It doesn't look like there's any sort of wing damage between the drivers, but Mitchell, your championship leader, has unfortunately dropped down into P12. And that makes Bambino your race leader, along with BR4 currently in P2. Absolute tragedy there for your championship leader as he drops down into P12. But this opens up a wonderful window of opportunity for BR4 as if he can only just manage to close the gap to Bambino and maybe make that potential overtake. He will be leading this race and will close the gap down massively to Mitchell. You know, Mitchell must be absolutely frustrated with Joe, and there may be potential overtakes. And now, unfortunately, the nightmares continue for Mitchell as he picks up a 3-second time penalty, being the first driver on the grid to pick up a penalty at the moment. Action-packed racing throughout this entire race as the Aston Martin of Typos gets extremely squirrely on the exit there, and now Italiano going side by side with Ishtar, the Ferrari and the Alfa Romeo, both Ferrari engines looking to battle each other, looking to battle it out, and it looks like Rigo is going to come out on top of this battle as he makes the move before the corner even begins. So Rigo now promotes himself up into P4, but the battle is not over just as yet. He does want to make the move on Adam, who in front of him has no DRS at the moment. We saw Ishtar pulling out of the slipstream of Rigo, maybe to look at a potential overtake, but nothing coming out of that yet. So it's an extremely close train between P3 all the way down into P7 at the moment. All these drivers looking for a potential opportunity to maybe hop onto the podium there. And it looks to be that BR4 has now actually managed to close the gap to Bambino. Very slightly though, he's just within the second. So assuming that he can go over the detection point within that gap, and it looks like that he's going to be able to. BR4 is going to have DRS on the car in front of him, which is going to help him massively gain a lot of time on the car in front of him. Meanwhile, Typos manages to get past Ishtar and promotes himself up into P4. So now, with the gap roughly 8 tenths and the 2 long straights coming up ahead, will BR4 be able to make a possible overtake heading into turn 1 or maybe even into the final corner of this track? Definitely, it doesn't look like he's going to be able to make a final move into the final corner, but he's definitely lining himself up very nicely to make a move into turn 1. So now with DRS and the gap being roughly 6/10 of a second, will BR4 be able to make the dive on Bambino and promote himself up into P1? And it doesn't seem to be the case. BR4 just a little bit too far behind on this occasion to maybe make the move. We see Mitchell now, who unfortunately dropped down in the P12, now coming into a battle with Donnie, who unfortunately cuts the track there a little bit to retain the position, but luckily gives it up and allows Mitchell through, and now Mitchell gets promoted back up into P11, still outside the points at the current moment. And Ishtar now being the second driver on the grid to pick up a 3-second time penalty as he goes once again massively off track there. So the tire struggle is definitely in fruition for him. As we now ride on board with BR4 once again as he approaches the DRS detection point. Once again, a lot closer to Bambino than he was on previous occasions, as there's a yellow flag in Sector 2. And it seems to be the AlphaTauri of Pyro at the moment. At least that's what I assumed it to be, but could be wrong. Of course, as BR4 now, with DRS wide open, massively trying to close the gap to Bambino. Bambino probably using every inch of battery that he has to hold BR4 back. With DRS wide open now, the gap closing down massively to the race leader, and unfortunately BR4 a bit too far back to maybe make a move heading into the final corner of the track. But now with a nicer run heading into turn 1, will he be able to make this overtake and become the race leader and maybe extend that gap to will he be able to extend that gap to Mitchell? As we can see a bit of action in the background there, as now Rigo managing to go side by side with Adam heading into turn 1. Now Adam with the outside line, managing to still continue that battle with Rigo, and unfortunately it's not going to work out for him as Rigo promotes himself up into P3. So we have a ton of battles left, right, and center throughout this entire track. The whole grid roughly bunched up together, as I believe Ishtar is now coming to the pits, possibly to fix some wing damage, as Joe says the fastest lap of the race. Typos, on the other hand, looking extremely close to Adam, who was in P3, but is now beginning to slowly drop off there. It's also important to consider that Bambino is on the medium tire compound, so Bambino obviously is going to have the fresher tires. Well, not the fresher tires, the faster tires. But obviously, as the race progresses, his tires are going to wear out a lot faster than BR4's will. Not to mention BR4 will be on the faster tire compound near the end of this race, and now heading towards the second last pit straight, heading down the DRS zone towards the not towards the pit straight, towards the final corner of the track. Once again, the gap closes down massively between BR4 and Bambino, and now BR4 looking a lot more closer than he did last lap to maybe make a potential overtake on Bambino. So now with DRS wide open as he's gaining, he's going side by side with Bambino and heading down into turn 1. BR4, your championship rival, Mitchell's championship rival, manages to promote himself up in a P1 and becomes your race leader. Meanwhile, Mitchell currently in P11, nowhere to be seen and outside the points. This is an absolutely nightmarish situation for Mitchell. Talk about stars aligning. We can see that everything seemed to work out for BR4 just as how he had hoped. Meanwhile, Typos on the other end, currently in P5, slowly closing that gap to Adam now. And Bambino already 8.5 tenths away from BR4 as Joe once again sets the fastest time of the race with a 1:32.0. It's lap 9 of 25. If you are just joining us, Mitchell started on pole position, but unfortunately got into an incident involving himself and Joe, and they both dropped down into P11 and 13 respectively. Meanwhile, your championship rival BR4 currently leading this race, 27 points separating him and Mitchell. At the end of this race, assuming that he doesn't get fastest lap, we'll be looking at a 2-point difference heading into the final race of the season. But of course, as we all know with F1, it's never really over as Jaguar now comes into the pits to switch off of his medium tires. It looks like the rest of the medium runners are looking to continue as we have a bit of action in the background there as now Donnie and Jaguar going side by side with each other. So now Jaguar with the inside line trying to make the move stick, but Donnie with the outside line and now following up the inside. They're still side by side through turn 1 and 2. And now who's going to come out on top? Is it going to be Alu? Alu now with the inside line manages to make the move stick and promotes himself up into P8. Meanwhile, at the front of the grid, we can see Bambino roughly a second away, almost a second out of BR4. He's just within that second gap, so assuming that he can stay within that gap. A driver who's on an absolute flyer at the moment is Rigo, who's currently in P3 and is looking to be gaining on Bambino as well. So the last thing Bambino would want is a headache from a driver behind him. Meanwhile, Mitchell gets promoted up into P10. After I believe it was Jaguar who came into the pits and switched onto the hard tire compound, and now Mitchell slowly gaining on Donnie. The gap was 2.2 seconds just a few laps ago, and now he's brought it down significantly. But unfortunately, due to Donnie having DRS from the car in front of him, it's just holding up Mitchell ever so slightly. And now once again with DRS wide open and him following bumper to bumper with the Aston Martin, the Ferrari of Mitchell going side by side with Donnie, and Mitchell manages to make the move stick before the corner even begins and promotes himself up into P9. We see Adam now, the medium runner in P5, manages to go into the pits and now switches on, most likely to switch on to the hard tire compound. Scalesy on the other hand, also going into the pits to switch on. And that promotes Mitchell back up into P6 as he's now going side by side with Alu and manages to keep the position and manages to stay in P6. BR4, somewhat in a race of his own at the moment, has a second, almost has a second gap to Bambino. Meanwhile, Rigo has closed that gap from a second to roughly 6 tenths. Pyro now picks up a 3-second time penalty. So we're a little under halfway through this race. And things are shaping up very, very nicely. Of course, Mitchell hasn't made his pit stop yet. Is on his 10-lap old hards. He's going to be out for a bit longer than expected. Meanwhile, it's surprising to see Typos and Bambino currently in a battle. But meanwhile, Italiano going side by side with Bambino and actually manages to make the move before the corner even begins and promotes himself up into P2. I was completely focused on the tire lives of every other drivers. I didn't even notice that Rigo had managed to make the move stick and now promotes himself up into P2. Now then, will Rigo come into a battle with BR4? Does he have the pace to catch up to him? We will have to see. Miesco now currently in P3 after he didn't pit on his 11-lap old hards. And after every other driver made their pit stops, it seems like Mitchell's now back up into P10, P4. But with how bunched up the pack is and seeing as how there's no safety cars out at the moment, the only thing that could really save Mitchell's race at this in this situation is a safety car. So after an exciting few couple of laps, now the drivers are beginning to space out from each other ever so slightly. Meanwhile, Adam's actually extremely close to Typos. Oh, as we have a spinner, and it seems to be Pyro, who's unfortunately spun out. He was doing so well and was up so far, or up on the grid, but unfortunately, those hard tires somewhat betraying him as he now spins out and drops down into P13. Very unfortunately, as he's trying to straighten his car out, that's to not drive into the wall there to damage his front wing. Not too sure what that was about. He could have gone pretty easily, but as long as he's moving. There's no intentional safety cars out on track. We should be fine. And I was talking about earlier, if Rigo has the pace to catch up to BR4, and it looks like he definitely does. And the gap now down to 0.7 of a second. Meanwhile, the gap between Adam and Typos slowly coming down as well. Typos obviously having no DRS from the car in front of him. And a very late defensive move there from Typos as he darts towards the racing line once again to cover off that potential move that Adam was going to make. And unfortunately, Joe retires from the session. It looks like he's retired in the pits, luckily. So it doesn't look like he's going to be causing any safety cars out on track at the moment. So we're still in store for a ton of action now as we're approaching the halfway point of this race. Oh, and the nightmares for Mitchell as Mitchell picks up another 3-second time penalty. So that's a total of 6 seconds applied to Mitchell's finishing time, which he's definitely not going to be happy about. Jaguar now closing the gap to Adam, who's unfortunately, by the looks of it, dropped off from Typos now. So now the Haas and the McLaren going side by side with each other. Adam with the inside line heading towards the final corner on the track. Manages to actually keep the position before the corner even begins. Had that little bit of top speed to prevent Jaguar from going side by side with him heading into the final corner. Plus with that inside line, it just helps so much more. Mitchell now coming into the pits to switch on to the medium tire compounds, looking for a potential undercut with 14 laps, with roughly with roughly 11 laps left to go in this race. Oh, my math was terrible. I just realized that I've been saying that we're a bit under halfway through this race. We are over halfway through this race by a significant margin. Jaguar trying to follow Adam through this S section, which is so difficult to do because of the dirty air. But it looks like he doesn't lose out on too much time, as we have a yellow flag in sector 1 and 2, and there's a spinner, and it's Bambino. Bambino, who's luckily still moving out on track at the moment. There was a bit of broken front wing there, as we can see the damage on the front right side of his car, but luckily he hasn't retired from the session, so we still have no safety car or virtual safety cars at the moment. Only 11 laps left to go in this race. Granted, the situation, if we were to finish the order as it is right now, looks like Mitchell is going to be losing out on almost, I want to say 2 positions, but I'm not entirely too sure. As we've seen earlier, my math isn't exactly great. As BR4, Rigo, and Miesco now all come into the pits, it looks like the Red Bull team has decided to double stack it. And now, will BR4 be able to come out before the rest of the pack? Yes, he will, quite comfortably, as a matter of fact. And he stays in P1 ahead of Rigo. Mitchell now currently in P8. Coming out right behind Miesco. And Rigo now with a 3-second time penalty. So now, if I was Miesco, knowing that my teammate is fighting for the championship, I would do absolutely everything I could to stop Mitchell from progressing through. I would drive so slowly just to prevent Mitchell from coming through. Waste as much time as possible, and it looks like Miesco is doing his level best to do just that, as Mitchell is looking left and right for any potential space to make an overtake. But no, unfortunately, he can't do anything just as yet. And you know this must be massively frustrating Mitchell, as he's wanting to get past Miesco as soon as possible. And Miesco doing a wonderful job for defending the position and preventing Mitchell from coming through. BR4 now with his fresh mediums should be looking to extend this gap as far up as possible. Take advantage of the fact that Miesco is holding up Mitchell desperately. And Mitchell now riding that bumper of the Red Bull, not looking to waste any time with DRS wide open now. And he's gaining slowly on the Red Bull, now going side by side with Miesco, heading into the final corner on track. Will Miesco be able to dive down the inside? Yes, he will. He dives down the inside and comes into a collision with Scalesy. Unfortunately, Miesco, desperately trying to keep that position from Mitchell, causes himself to outbrake himself and drive straight into Scalesy, and they both spin out. And that promotes Mitchell up into P6. So all that hard work that Miesco was doing, unfortunately, does not pay off. Meanwhile, in the background there, we can see Donnie and Alu coming into a battle of their own. Alu with the inside line looks to be trying to make that defensive move, but unfortunately it doesn't. Actually, never mind, it worked out very, very well for him. So now Alu actually manages to retain P7. It looked like it was done, the move was done, and Donnie managed to get through, but no, Alu actually managed to make managed to retain his position. So great racing from him. But the story now lies with Mitchell, who's currently in P6, has a 6-second time penalty. And Pyro setting the fastest lap of the race with a 131.6. So I was saying earlier that if the race finishes as it is right now, Mitchell would be dropped down into roughly, I want to say P9, and the gap to the champion, and the gap between BR4 and Mitchell would be roughly 4 points, I believe, heading into the final race. That 6-second penalty is massively costing Mitchell. Meanwhile, looking up the grid, rather peaceful race up here, as Adams now slowly closing the gap to Typos for the final step on the podium, and Jaguar very close behind him. All three of these drivers are on the hard tire compound. We can see Rigo now sets the fastest time of the race on his mediums with a 131.1, looking to close that gap to BR4. Oh, it looked like Adam was maybe looking to go around the outside of Typos there. Roughly a tenth separating both drivers. This is for the final step of the podium. We've seen Adam and Typos having a battle throughout this entire race by the looks of it. And Mitchell once again with a 3-second time penalty. So I'm going to take a second and take a look at the penalty systems over here. So now we can see Mitchell with a 9-second penalty. Oh, that is absolutely painful for your championship leader. Clearly the struggles are continuing for him. He's currently in P6, and now it looks like Adam looking to make the potential overtake on Typos, but Typos manages to cover the corner off very nicely there, as there was a bit of contact between both drivers, but luckily none of them spin out and none of them seem to have any sort of damage from that. And now Adam choosing to go the long way around the outside, which will head into the inside, which will allow him to get access to the inside line heading into the next corner. Now, so then Adam with the outside, followed by the inside line, manages to make the move on Typos and promotes himself up into P3. Rigo on the other hand, 6.5 tenths, roughly 7 tenths actually, behind BR4. There's only 7 laps left to go in this race. Time slowly running out for Mitchell. He's driving a bit of a lonely race at the moment. Mieszko currently in P8, roughly 4 tenths separating him and Alu. The gap is now 4.5 tenths between Italiano and BR4, and Rigo is actually massively gaining on the Red Bull driver. And it looks like he's going to give it a very nice run heading down the pit straight. So now, will Rigo be able to make this overtake on BR4 and take a lead of this race? We will have to see. BR4 sticking towards the left side of the track as much as possible. And now Rigo and BR4 going side by side, heading into turn 1. And it looks like Rigo's actually going to be able to make the move stick and is going to be able to overtake BR4 for the lead of this race. So now BR4 is going to be desperately looking to make this overtake back as soon as possible, because he's looking to extend this gap to, he's looking to close this gap to Mitchell as much as possible. And there's a yellow flag in sector 2, and it seems to be Ishtar, who unfortunately lost his car there. It doesn't look like he has any massive amounts of wing damage, and luckily didn't retire from the race, so we have no safety cars yet. But BR4 is now no longer the lead of this race. It is now Rigo. And a driver who's going to definitely be smiling about that is Mitchell, as we have another yellow flag in Sector 3, and it's once again Ishtar as the nightmares continue. Luckily, he doesn't retire from the session once again, so we still have no safety cars. So now will BR4 be able to close this gap to Rigo? Through the DRS zone, he is gaining on him. Of course, not gaining enough, but luckily for BR4, there are 3 DRS zones following each other. So once again now, DRS wide open as Rigo currently roughly 4 tenths ahead of BR4, and that gap coming down extremely quickly now. As BR4 now tries to line himself up very nicely to make an overtake on Rigo as soon as possible. Looks like he's got a pretty decent run out of the corner, and with DRS wide open, he's gaining on Rigo. So once again, the battle for the lead of this race continues, and once again, BR4 manages to make the overtake stick and manages to bring himself back up into the lead of this race. Rigo, as a result, subsequently dropping down into P2, as Mitchell now drops in the fastest lap of this race with a 1:31.0. Currently in P3, as a matter of fact. I'm not too sure how he managed to gain so many positions so quickly. Mitchell now all of a sudden in P3. So when I was thinking that this battle was relatively over and that we're going to be looking at a very exciting race heading into the final race of the season, Mitchell's actually brought it up very, very nicely to BR4. Currently in P3 now. Also granted as penalties, of course, Mitchell's probably going to be dropping down a considerable few positions, assuming that he can't pull out a significant gap to the cars behind him. But I would like to actually get some maths done to see that if Mitchell wins this race, sorry, not if Mitchell wins this race, where Mitchell will need to be to keep the championship battle alive. It looks like Rigo's actually dropped off from BR4. Roughly 1.3 seconds is the gap between BR4 and Mitchell at the moment. So as long as BR4 wins this race, even if Mitchell finishes P2, I believe that the championship battle is still not over, as I believe BR4 will still have a 22-point gap to close to Mitchell heading into the final race of the season. This is assuming Mitchell comes in P2, of course. If Mitchell somehow manages to stay in P3, and BR4 does not manage to get fastest lap, and neither does Mitchell, then the gap will be 20 points. Seems like Rigo's actually significantly dropped off from BR4. 3.7, 3.8 seconds is the gap now to BR4. So in this latter half of this race, nearing the end, it seems like BR4 has massively picked up the pace and is looking to extend his gap as much as possible. Meanwhile, Mitchell trying to extend the gap to Typos as much as possible. Throughout all this race, we have had nothing but continuous drama. It's been almost, very frankly, it's been very exhausting to commentate over with all the action that we've had so far. But with only 3 laps left to go, BR4 is going to have to hang on for just a bit longer to keep his championship dreams alive. And Pyro now picks up a 3-second time penalty, unfortunately. The gap now from Mitchell to BR4 is roughly 9 seconds. Adam now once again slowly gaining on Typos. This McLaren, so Adam and Typos have been basically at each other's throats from the start to the end of this race, and now we can see Miesco and Alu now coming into a battle of their own. Alu with the inside line manages to keep the position and stays in P7, as we have a yellow flag in Sector 3. In Sector 1, and I'm not too sure who that was. It looked like it might have been Mitchell, as a matter of fact. No, it wasn't Mitchell. Apologies, it was Ishtar. Okay. For a second there, I had a mini heart attack. I thought once again Mitchell's nightmares continued, but luckily, by the looks of it, the battle is still on. But yeah, as I was saying, Adam and Typos basically at each other's throats since the beginning of this race. These two drivers have been basically become very familiar with each other's cars, with how much they've been seeing each other throughout this track, throughout this whole race today. And they are once again in a battle now for P4. Two laps left to go. Or well, 2.5. As we near the end of this race, the action has somewhat died down from the chaos that we were experiencing within the first few laps, but obviously we still have an intense story here to see, and as Pyro unfortunately spins out there, luckily he doesn't, oh never mind, there is a broken piece of his front wing on the track at the moment, so luckily for us he doesn't retire on track, so we aren't going to be experiencing any other issues. Meanwhile, Ishtar at the moment putting on the soft tire compounds to maybe go for the fastest lap of the race. Is there a way I can actually check that? Who has the fastest lap? No? Okay. Oh, actually we can. So BR4 has the fastest lap of the race. So Ishtar trying to put on the soft tire compounds to steal it from championship leader, of course. I really do wish there was a bit more to commentate over it. We did see Rigo a few seconds ago, I forgot to mention, did pick up another 3-second time penalty, and now his cumulative total is now roughly 6 seconds. But obviously I don't think it's going to really be too much of a factor for him, considering Mitchell behind him has 9 seconds worth of penalties. But the gap to Typos is almost 5 seconds. So Mitchell's done a fantastic job for pretty much bringing up that gap to the cars behind him. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we are on the final lap of this race, lap 25 of 25. We said it at the start of the session that BR4 was going to need somewhat of a miracle here if he was looking to keep this championship battle alive. And by the looks of it, a miracle is exactly what he's gotten, as Mitchell's early struggles along with his collision with Joe Royal at the start of this race costed him dearly. It's unfortunate to see both the Williams drivers retire from the session, as they both were P1 and P3 respectively. But unfortunately, they are, of course, out of this race now. BR4, without a penalty, has seemingly driven a perfect drive here today. He couldn't have asked for a better night for himself. Of course, ideally, he would have wanted Mitchell to be a bit lower on the grid, but he's not going to be complaining about a race win, that's for sure. Meanwhile, Mitchell, on the other hand, currently P3. The gap to Typos is 5.6 seconds. We're going to see as he comes across the line where Mitchell will end up finishing. Meanwhile, our attention, we should bring it towards BR4. BR4, your championship rival, the championship rival to Mitchell. A driver who seemingly was almost out of the championship battle, but has brought it back at the last second. BR4 comes across the line and wins the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Now, this is what we are waiting for. Italiano comes across the line, finishes in P2. Mitchell comes across the line and finishes in P3. But Mitchell may have pulled out a decent gap to the cars behind him. Will he lose out on any positions as both Adam and Typos come across the line, and Mitchell drops down only to P4. So let's take a quick look at what this means for the championship. 27 points was the gap. P4 gets wait. I'll just quickly do some maths. I should say, what an unbelievable race this has been.